It's time again for the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast with Dr. John Dentico. The mission of our podcast is to provide 21st century leadership training for a talent-driven world. We help organizations implement strategies and practices designed to attract, hire, engage, and retain top talent while mitigating the effects of burnout. Our guests are experts in various fields of organizational dynamics, including, but not limited to, leadership, management, communication, and coaching. They bring a world of knowledge and solutions to our viewers and listeners. I am sincerely grateful for their participation and ideas. So let's dive in. And if you enjoy our podcast, please like, share, and subscribe. We genuinely appreciate your support. Hello again and welcome to the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Dr. John Dentico. With me today is Mitchell Levy, an accomplished entrepreneur who has created 20 businesses in Silicon Valley, including 4 publishing companies that have published over 750 books. He's provided strategic consulting to hundreds of companies and has been chairman of the board of a NASDAQ-listed company. Mitchell is a global credibility expert, a 2 times TEDx speaker, an internationally best-selling author of 60 books, and an executive coach at Marshall Goldsmith's 100 Coaches. After interviewing 500 thought leaders on credibility, he published a 7-country international best-selling book, delivered a powerful TEDx speech on humanity, created courses, and created the Credibility Nation membership community to help those live, learn, and surround themselves with others on the credibility journey. I am pleased and honored to have him here with me today. Good afternoon, Mitchell. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I'm equally as honored.
Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. As I have a tendency to say, let's get down to business.
Okay.
Mitchell, here we are. First question. What are the characteristics of and how do you define credibility?
If you look at the definition of credibility in the dictionary, it's 1/3 accurate. What it'll say is credibility is the quality in which you're trusted. Now, that may have been true prior to the internet, prior to an opportunity to really get to know people well. So what came out of the interviews is credibility is the quality in which you're trusted, known, and liked. And what's interesting about that is underneath each of those piers, each one of those pillars, there are overall 10 values associated with credibility. But at the end of the day, what you want to think about is being trusted, being known, and being liked.
Okay. Let me ask this question. How can a person who aspires to be a leader in an organization develop credibility? That is to say, what does a person have to do to become credible?
So first, probably one of the most important things is to recognize that the title does not make you credible. Those that are in the command and control world who used to feel that the title is enough, those that are in the world that says, say as I do, not as I say, those are not credible attributes these days. Of the values of credibility that make people a great leader, let me think about, of the 10, it's really hard because so many of them are valuable. But let's start with 2, which are essentially the same. Integrity. I separate integrity under the pillar of being trusted as your external integrity. It's what you say to the world. I also, under being known as people get to know you, it's your internal integrity. So you want to make sure there's absolute alignment with your internal and external integrity. Part of being trusted is also being coachable. So going around and asking those people that you work for, that you work with, who work for you, asking them ideas, questions, thoughts, and being coachable and learnable. And how to be likable is, I call it spreading cred dust. If you get something from a subordinate in terms of a great idea moving forward, don't take the idea and make it yours. The idea is still that person's, if you spread their ideas, thoughts, and actions, spreading cred dust, you become much more likable. And if I'm going to think about everything else, the last thing I'll say, there are two elements associated with being likable. So one, I mentioned spreading cred dust or sharing the ideas, thoughts, and actions of others. The second is showing respect. And so for every meeting, regardless who you're meeting with, come early, come prepared, come with your heart.
What's interesting, the leadership model I developed over the course of the past 30 years, the definition I have is very specific definition of leadership. I have a colleague who has spent the last 20 years gathering the different definitions of models of leadership. And the last time I checked with him, he was up to 646.
By the way, if that's published anywhere, I'd love to see it.
No, actually, I don't think it's published, but I did reference it in my book as an unpublished research finding. But the point is that in my definition of leadership, which I believe is not tied to any position, it's not a positional issue, is that leadership is an influence relationship that engenders safety, trust, and commitment. If you have those things, that's the most basic element, because people need to feel safe that they're going to be able to say what they need to say and not feel like you're going to come hunt them down later on. So I agree with you. And I normally refer to those who have influence relationships or have that ability as the go-to people in an organization. I'm sure you've heard that term. There are people in organizations that we go to that are trusted. They give us the truth. They may have quote unquote corporate knowledge. They've been around for a while. Not usually the most senior people, normally people that are spread throughout the organization. So I agree with you. It is not, leadership to me is not positional at all. I'd like to move on and ask you this next question, if I might. Can you explain, and I saw this in your bio in a pre-workout, can you explain the connection between credibility and clarity? And why are these two ideas joined at the hip, so to speak?
So it turns out that many people push and focus on this concept of credibility. And the question that I will ask and the statement that I'll give afterwards will help clarify things for you. First of all, what are you credible in? And being able to have the ability to have absolute clarity of who you are and how you show up in the world is extremely powerful. That level of clarity executed properly will bring you tremendous amount of credibility. So the statement I'll say is clarity comes first, credibility comes second. And what most people do is they focus on this thing called credibility. They think they're credible because of the title, or they think they're credible because they are trusted, known, and liked. That's great. But what are you trusted, known, and liked for? And what it comes to with clarity is in a very short period of time. I typically think of it as 1 to 3 seconds. Can you articulate the audience that you serve? And the concept I have is called a CPOP, and I'm sure we'll jump into that. Stands for Customer Point of Possibilities. And what I will say is, if you are a credible human, or if you're running or part of a credible company, you are of service to others. So if you're service to others, then who do you serve and what is their pain point or pleasure point from their perspective, not yours? That is the definition of this concept called a CPOP. Your Customer Point of Possibilities is you're a servant person, so you're of service to others, and you're actually articulating the who and the what.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think you really have to know what you're about. But the issue, the thing that I drive to is, okay, fine, I accept that, no problem. It's the road to get there, in a sense. I don't think people show up with clarity on any given day. They have to work towards that to gain the clarity and then gain the credibility. In your mind, how do they do that? Are there steps to this? I'm trying to peel this onion back a little bit because I myself am very interested in the how to. That's in the title of my book, how to accelerate the impact of 21st century leadership. How does a person begin the journey, or what does the journey look like to become clear and to become credible?
Let's, if you don't mind, John, we could do an exercise and specifically talk to you about your clarity. If you don't mind, we'll do it in a couple of minutes. So the definition of a CPOP, that customer point of possibility, is the who and the what. And I'm going to argue a little bit. You could walk in the room with absolute clarity. That doesn't mean you have credibility yet. The really powerful part about having clarity is that if you can then initially say to somebody in less, like I said, 1, 2, 3 seconds, that clarity statement, what comes next is someone just going to say, tell me more. If within a minute you could say, how do you address that level of clarity you just talked about? How do you address that playground you play in? The level of credibility you have is really powerful if you can actually do that. So looking at you, John, it comes down to the who and the what. So I'll just say really quickly, you personally, in terms of what you do in the business you serve, who is it that you serve? Who is the audience that you work with?
I would say that I serve anyone in organizations who comes in contact with, I'd say, the dynamic of leadership, who's involved with leadership at some level.
So the who, anyone on the planet that's a leader. Can we narrow that down?
It's a good question. I'd like to think that I serve organizations, because here's the problem. Leadership has a universal appeal, a universal connection to almost everything that we do. And I'll be honest, it's very difficult for me to narrow that down to say, oh, I only work with IT companies, for example, or I only work with not-for-profits. So I think, to my own detriment, I do have difficulty scaling that down.
So is there a particular, if you think about where 80% of your revenue came from last year, was there a particular vertical that was powerful for you, or were you still relatively all over?
Relatively all over.
Okay. What size company typically do you find yourself working with?
Somewhere in the neighborhood of, I would say, small to medium-sized companies.
Okay. And what is it? What's that definition? What's that mean?
Oh, I'd say between 10 to maybe 250 people, 300 people.
Okay. And that is the proper definition, at least from the United States, in terms of what a SME is. Okay. And then let's now step back and go from their perspective of the audience you serve. Typically, what would be the pain point that they recognize they have, and or we'll start there. What's the pain point? We're going to ask one more question.
Okay. In terms of the organization itself, my work now, you're asking me that question?
Yeah. What do they perceive as the pain point? Why would they want to talk to you in the first place?
Because my work is focused on attracting, hiring, engaging, and retaining top talent.
Okay. Sorry, I should have asked that question. From their perspective, what is their pain point?
Their inability, let's say, to retain good people.
Ah.
And I would add this to it because it's another function of burnout. How do we deal with burnout in an organization?
Got it. Okay. What would be an interesting pleasure point?
For them?
Yeah.
Or for me?
Yeah. No, we're talking about them. So from their perspective. So remember, clarity is the who and the what. It's who you serve, SMEs, and then either what is their pain point from their perspective, or what is their pleasure point?
I think their pleasure point is low turnover. I think that would be the marker, that their turnover is low and that they're functioning, and of course that's subjective, but they're functioning well and their turnover is low and things are in effect getting done. And people are happy. That's the other thing too, that people are engaged and happy in their jobs.
Okay. So because we're on a podcast and we've used half our time, what I can do is tell you that you speak out loud enough that your clarity is at your fingertips. Just no one's ever taught you what is the formula.
Right.
So let me And this, there's nothing wrong with this. I would say, so first of all, for those that are listening, here's what's fascinating. 90% of humans are born, live, and die without ever knowing their purpose. 98% do not have clarity. And we're just not taught. We're taught all these marketing cookie cutter things. So what I want to say is I've got, let's see, for you, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 words for you.
Okay.
And how cool would it be if you could actually articulate 6 words and that represents the playground you play in? John, that's clarity.
Right.
Now, what I'll say is, if you don't mind, I'm going to take a teeny pattern interrupt. I'm going to talk about Mitchell for a second. I'll do my CPOP and my tell me more. It'll be less than a minute. And then we'll go back and talk about yours. We'll give your CPOP and tell me more. So at least you can give an example.
Okay.
And by the way, I'll have to be really clear. I'm going to start with the word coaches. And I never thought that I would narrow my audience to be specifically coaches. The reason I'm doing that is I've got the clarity thing that I'm doing. I have a clarity certification program. That clarity thing is very horizontal. But if you follow Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm, his statement was grab a bowling alley or grab a vertical you're going to go after first. So my first vertical is coaches. My second vertical is fractional CXOs. After that, I might go horizontal. So my CPOP is 8 words. Coaches who've created a job, not a business. And so when people hear that, what might happen is if you're a potential referral source, you'd be one. If you're a potential customer, what you're going to do is you can say, Mitchell, tell me more. So let me do the tell me more. There are so many coaches on the planet. If you actually look at the ICF, the International Coaching Federation, they do a biannual survey. And there are over 100,000 executive coaches in the US whose average salary is $50,000. It's crazy. They've been taught and are certified on how to do transformation, bring a company or an individual from A to B. But they've not been taught how to run a business, how to have clarity, how to have a consistent business that works in a good way for them. We have a done with you program where the coach gets a coach, they get a mastermind, they get leads coming in the door, and they end up having a much more successful business. So that would be Mitchell, right? And if you think about that, it's from the perspective of when you hear the tell me more, I have that much more credibility because of the clarity that I've been able to state. Do you mind if I do yours? I'll do your CPOP and tell me more.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay. So because remember, the CPOP is the who and the what. It's interesting. 80% of the time, the CPOP should be a negative. 20%, if you're actually selling and making money from CEOs and you servicing CEOs, you sometimes have a positive or CPOP. In your case, the negative made more sense. And so yours is SMEs that can't retain good talent. Now you could do talent or people, SMEs that can't retain good people. I don't know, that's interesting. I like people better. Okay, so SMEs that can't, but you could figure out what that is. But let me do your tell me more. Listen, I work with CEOs from a number of different verticals. And in those verticals, sometimes they have a hard time hiring people. They certainly have a hard time retaining people. And employee retention, employee engagement sucks. I have a whole series of processes, programs, workshops that allow the SME to attract the right people and to keep them longer than their competition. Right? That is 40 seconds? When you say that, the most natural thing for either the referral partner, they know how to recommend you. For the prospect, they're going to say, how do you have credibility to do that? You're now that much further along. You're only a minute into the conversation and they're already asking you, what do you have? And in your case, you have a ton of credibility that brings you there. But when you ask me, what's the difference between clarity and credibility? Clarity is to articulate, in your case, in 6 words, the playground you play in. And then to be able to, when they say, tell me more, in less than a minute, to talk about how you play in your playground. How'd I do? You're shaking your head. So for those that are listening.
It's great. I think you're absolutely on the money. I think that one of the things I've said is, and I don't know where this fits in, to be perfectly honest, But I've always thought that one of the things I wanted to do through my work was to help people live a more productive, prosperous, and meaningful life.
I
Do
love
you like
that.
that? And through, because, and I could give you hours of this and I won't, but I'll just give you 30 seconds because I think the leadership ideas and models that we're using nowadays, still left over from the industrial times, just don't work. In a world, hybrid work environment where people are looking to be involved in the decision-making processes of an organization. They want to matter and they want their work to matter. So a lot of what I'm trying to do in my work is to say the leadership has changed. It's different. And if you want to harness the power of people, you've got to accept this and look at leadership from a different perspective. That's where I'm at.
John,
Yeah.
you just did a great tell me more.
Ah,
Just
great.
just listen back to the last 40, 50 seconds. That's a great tell me more. Right? And then when this again, how do you have credibility to do that? I did a dissertation that did this. I focus on that. I have a friend who has 656 leaders. Like, you embed that, but what you want to get out really quickly, and you certainly can in the tell me more, is the fact that this is the playground you want to play in and you have passion for delivering success in your playground. Remember, credibility is the quality in which you're trusted, known, and liked. If you could, in a minute, get people to know you a little bit better and get to even like you a little bit better in a minute, very powerful.
I think it's great. I get it. I get it, and I appreciate it very much. I want you to know that.
Oh,
I didn't think I'd be the subject today, but
I'm
I'm good with it. You know what I mean? It's been very helpful. I've always thought, and this is, we talked about this just prior to the podcast, in terms of clarity. Finishing my book, finishing Throttle Up, gave me great clarity about the tell me more piece, if you will. In other words, this is what I'm about. This is why I'm in this business. This is what I do. This is the tell me more piece. I don't think I did a good job of this. I don't think I did a good job in the 6 words area about what arena I want to play in and why I'm in that arena. Why I'm in that arena. I've always labored over that, to be perfectly honest. But I really appreciate it very much.
Oh, honored. You said, Mitchell, tell me more about the how. And given our 5 minutes ahead of time, and you and I had not talked before, so given our 5 minutes ahead of time, I felt that everything you do is at your fingertips. And if you've not been trained to really listen for the simplicity, by the way, the CPOP, customer point of possibilities, comes before the why. Simon Sinek taught us about the why, but the why comes last. What comes, for me to understand you, I didn't need to know the why. There's probably a really good reason why this is important to you, right? That comes after. It doesn't stop you from being able to articulate the playground you play in such a way that people go, hey, I'm interested. I want to know more. I want to play in that playground with you. I want to bring you in to do that. And so when you said how, Mitchell, I was thinking, no, you might want to play live, and let's just play live and let's see what happens. And what I'll say to you now, this is important for those who are listening as well. What your CPOP is specifically related to you, and I'll take it a step further. We as humans, we vibrate at a frequency, all right? And it turns out that the CPAP represents the frequency you're vibrating at the moment. It is where you are executing on your purpose today. Now, here's one of the issues, John, and I want you to be in the 10%. I'll tell you more in a minute. When somebody hears their CPOP, or when I share with a CEO to the company their CPOP, 10% of the time they get it, they understand it, they know what to do next. 90% of the time, they will allow themselves to get out of harmony, get out of frequency with their CPOP somewhere between 2 hours and 2 weeks. And it's simply because the world is structured in such a way that we've learned all these really difficult ways to run businesses. We've learned all these difficult ways to lead. The mission statement, the 30-second elevator pitch that you have to memorize, the KPIs, values, and all that stuff. But I'm going to say, let's all step back to the beginning. If the beginning is allowing the company or the individual to articulate the playground they play in 1, 2, or 3 seconds, and you then allow everything to stem from that, all the other things that we've been taught, they become a lot simpler to actually live and execute by. And if it's a lot simpler, you could also make it easier.
There's a great saying that I've always loved. That is, oftentimes the simplest things are the most powerful, and I truly believe that. I think you have to reduce it down a level that people can immediately connect. So I appreciate it very much.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah. Now you explained Kratos. I got one final question for you, and then we'll close it out. Fair enough?
Absolutely.
You may have already answered this. I think you probably have, but I'm going to ask it anyway. You have interviewed over 500 thought leaders. Were they all credible? If not, how many, giving a rough percentage, were credible in your opinion? And what would you say were the missing elements? And again, you may have already covered this.
No, I didn't really cover that in that question. In general, the people I interviewed all had good hearts, good intentions. It's just, there's a couple words that came out of the interviews. One was and a life purpose for me in terms of I want more humans to be credible versus the other. And what I call the other is dubious. The reason I specifically chose the word dubious, I didn't want it to make good or bad, heaven or hell, good or evil, right? That wasn't the intention I wanted to be, because sometimes people are dubious not because they are bad people, but they're dubious because that's what they were taught.
Right.
And so the elements that I came up, and I did a great TEDx. It's called "We Are Losing Our Humanity." I'm tired of watching it happen. And a lot of times what would happen is people would come late or they would not come prepared, right? And by the way, and I'll give you the example of the person who was the most dubious and least credible person, right? So I'll give you that example. But I'm going to say part of it is prior to doing the interviews, I'd always come late. I would be under the impression that my time was valuable. And if I came 1, 2, 3 minutes, it was okay. I was completely ignorant of the fact that the person I'm meeting with is more important than me, that their time is more valuable than mine, regardless of how much I got paid or what I was worth. And that is the aspect of showing respect. So I'll tell you, the most uncredible person I met is a professional speaker, typically making $35,000 a keynote. And
Wow.
what would happen when people would come in the room, I would do a little bit of green room conversation, and I'd ask, the goal of the interviews was to ultimately ask 5 questions in 5 minutes. Because you want to show credibility, answer 5 questions in 5 minutes. And the first question is, what's your CPOP? And I would have sent a 16-minute video ahead of time on how to prepare. So what's not credible? Thinking you're smart enough not to have to watch the 16-minute video. So I'd say, hey, what's your CPOP? And he gave me his 30-second memorized elevator pitch. By the way, the reason elevator pitches suck is because they're from your head, not from your heart. By the time you get to the tell me more, which could be the elevator pitch, I want to hear what's in your heart, not what's in your head. I want to hear how you play in your playground, not some memorized piece of garbage that you think is going to elicit opinion. So I asked him, what's a CPOP? And he gave me 30 seconds. So I said, most people just start with who they serve and what is the pain point or pleasure point from the perspective of the client they work with. He narrowed it down to 15 seconds. And then I asked this question: would you mind if I do a little bit of coaching? His response blew me away because I wasn't ready for it. His response is, yes, I do. I apparently have my way of doing things and you have yours, and I don't want to learn yours. By the way, at the time, I had 9 values of credibility. And after I thought about that conversation, I added a 10th, which was being coachable. And what I ended up doing is I left enough silence that he then came back and said, I don't think this is going to work out with you. And I said, I agree. Thanks so much. And good luck with everything you do. But let me ask you this. I've sat on the board of a NASDAQ company. When the CEO said, hey, I want to bring in a staff member, I want to bring in somebody on the executive team, do you think I would ever, this is me sitting on the board of a public company, the CEO is bringing somebody in, I would ever want someone to come in and say, hey, I know more than the CEO. I'm not going to listen to the CEO. I'm not going to listen to customers. I'm not going to listen to my staff because I know and have all the answers. Do you think I would ever say yes to that type of person? The answer is, of course not. And so being coachable or the lack of being coachable is probably one of the worst things somebody could do in terms of credibility.
Very interesting. I agree. I think, I know we're getting close to you leaving and for another appointment, but I'll just mention this. I became a student of a gent by the name of John Boyd. Now, I never met John Boyd. But John Boyd is considered to be the greatest American military strategist of our time. He is the acknowledged father of the F-15, the F-16, is up deep into the elbows with the A-10 warhead. And he's done some really brilliant ideas. He is the creator of what's called the OODA loop. I don't know if you've ever heard of the observe, orient, decide, and act. And he was one of the original Top Guns. He was one of the original red flag guys at Nellis. And he made this speech once. In fact, I closed my book out with this that I got from Robert Korn, who wrote a book called Boyd, the Fighter Pilot That Changed the Art of War. And he says someday there's going to be a roll call. And the roll call will be where you have to answer up whether or not you want to be somebody or you want to do something. Because when you're trying to be somebody, you'll be an accepted member. You'll get the great jobs. You'll be a member of the club, if you will. But to do something sometimes requires you, and many times requires you to go against the grain and to be true to yourself, in a sense. To be able to say, I can be true to myself and I have to be true to myself. And somehow I think this fits into what we've been talking about, is that many times people go along to get along and they're not really credible because they're always trying to gain the next position. They're trying to move up the ladder. Okay, fine. But you lose credibility and you lose your own sense of clarity of who you are in those environments. And oftentimes it's about keeping your job. I have this saying where I said, there comes a time in your life when you have to make the decision between keeping your job or losing your soul. And I think many times people have to make that choice. It's a conscious decision. But I don't know, any reflection on that from your perspective?
So yes, it goes back to the first thing I said. When you have a misalignment between your external and internal integrity, people could feel that. And that level of mismatch will completely shut you out of many tables, many conversations.
I agree. Listen, Mitchell, you've been a spectacular guest. I appreciate your time here today on the Throttle of Leadership podcast. I can't thank you enough for the work with me. I thought I got a free session here today. That's really wonderful. I appreciate it very much. And thanks again. I really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Hey, do you mind? I'm going to leave with one thing. Go to my website for those that are interested. It's mitchellevy.com. So it's mitchelevy.com. And there you can learn more about what I'm doing with Clarity and the sessions I have. We do once a month. I'm doing a public clarity session. Would love, for those that are interested, love to have you there. And if you decide it makes sense to book time on my calendar, you could also get access to my calendar there. So for those that want to reach out, if this was powerful, you want to deploy Clarity inside your company, John, I'll send you. I just published a new article in CEO Magazine, focus on deploying clarity inside companies. So if you're interested in any of those things, please reach out. It's at mitchelllevy.com.
Great. I'll make sure that we put that front and center when we publish this podcast. Thanks again, Mitchell. You have a wonderful day and good luck to you. I wish you all the best in the future.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.